This meeting is being recorded.
So good afternoon, people that are just joining. I can see the number of participants increasing steadily. So we'll just let a few more people log in before we start our launch event. So for those of you joining, this is the launch event for the second edition of the Day in the Life of 2035, which is a narrative analysis of the operation and I guess also the structure of a future decarbonized electricity system in 2035. So we're up to 140 people at the moment. We did have 400 register, so I'll let a few more people join before we start. Good afternoon again for those people who are just joining. I can see the numbers creeping up steadily. When we get to about 200, I think we'll start off with an introduction and just go through the agenda. Just while you're joining, if you want to use the chat function, make any points or any questions you've got, my colleague John D. Hayes will be on the chat room and he'll endeavour to answer questions directly or potentially pass them through to the panel. You can also put questions in the Q&A function as well. Be interested to know where you're from. So if you want to use the chat function right now and just let us know where you're logging in from and maybe a little comment about the weather there. I'm down in sunny Devon and it's actually a lovely day today. Good autumnal weather. We've got a question here. The chat is disabled. Emma, can we address that?
Yeah, I'll have a look and see if I can enable it.
Thanks for raising that, Mark and Duncan. Great. So I think I'll kick off now. We've got over 200 people registered and quite a few more joining at the same time. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Johnny Gowdy. I'm a director at Regen, and this is the launch event for the Day in the Life of 2035, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a sort of narrative analysis of what a decarbonized electricity system might look like and how it might operate in the year 2035. I'll just quickly run through the agenda. In a moment, we're going to hear from Becky Hart from the National Grid ESO. She's a strategy manager there and has been, commissioned this piece of work. So thank you very much to her, but has also been leading the work on the Bridging the Gap program, which has really been looking at this question about how we get from where we are now into a future energy system, which is decarbonized, smarter, much more flexible, and much more responsive to the needs of the consumer. After that, we'll have a presentation from Sophie Winnie, who's been the lead analyst on this piece of work. She'll give an introduction to the Day in the Life report. It's an interactive report, so a very quick run through, really as a teaser to encourage you guys to all go and have a look and play around with it yourselves. There's lots of content in there, lots of themes to explore. Then we've got a panel discussion. I'll introduce the panel when we get to that point, but we'll be having a discussion about really what it means to have a decarbonised electricity system in 2035, how that might look, what are the challenges to get there, and perhaps reflecting back on how we get from where we are now until then. So just by way of context, you'll have realised that this is the second edition of the Day in the Life. Those of you that joined us last year will have seen that the first edition of Day in the Life really focused on what would happen during a stress period with very low wind and very low solar generation, with comparatively high demand during a winter day. So we were focusing very much on the occurrence of low generation on the system and the need to bring forward additional resources of flexibility, dispatchable power, for example, to maintain system balance and system operability. In the second edition, we've extended that analysis, and we're actually looking at the opposite occurrence of very high generation, so lots of wind, lots of solar, but the potential for the combination of renewables plus nuclear to actually exceed the total demand on the system, and what challenges that would bring in terms of balancing, and in particular, what challenges that brings in terms of operability. And for that, we've chosen a summer, sunny, windy day. I should hasten to add, that's not to say that winter days will be characterized by low generation and summer days by high generation. In fact, we've seen quite a lot of the opposite, and particularly this summer where we have had days of low generation and challenges around system balancing. But the main point, I suppose, is to explore those two themes, those two extremes, and to see, really test the system and the operability of the system, and also to explore very much how different actors will participate and contribute towards the overall energy system working efficiently and effectively. And that's kind of the themes that we'll be talking about today. Just to wrap up my introduction, I'd like to say a few words of thanks, just in case we run out at the end. Thanks obviously to the Regen team, and particularly Sophie, for leading this piece of work. You know, a huge amount of effort's gone in, a lot of thought's gone into that as well. I'd like to mention Simon Gill in particular, who kicked off the project and is now an associate of Regen. And thanks again to the ESO, Becky and her team. We've had lots of really constructive input, lots of data and modeling that we've been able to draw upon, particularly from the work that the FES team has done. And that's really enabled us to pull this together. So I think I'll move on now. We've got 260 odd people registered, and I'd like to invite Becky Hart to give us an introduction from the ESO. Thanks very much, Becky.
Thanks, Johnny. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to you all for showing up today. It's hopefully going to be a really interesting presentation. As Johnny said, I'm a strategy manager at the ESO, and it's been my responsibility for the past couple of years to run our Bridging the Gap project. So I wanted to run through just a couple of slides. I'll try not to talk too much because I know you want to get into the detail of what Sophie's done. But I'll just run through a couple of slides and explain what Bridging the Gap is about. So if we could flick on to the first slide. So Bridging the Gap is the report that Day in the Life report was part of last year. It is a project that essentially was set up to be the so what of FES. So what does FES actually tell us about what we need to do today, next year, in the next 5 years, or even in the next 10 years, not out to 2050 and sort of like all of these different scenarios? Where can we find those areas of commonality where we can actually say, okay, these are actions that we all know are going to be necessary for net zero. Can we crack on and do them now? So where are these areas of urgency, and are we addressing them adequately? So with this recent 2035 target for a fully decarbonised electricity system, this has really focused the debate, and particularly the ESO's mind, as you can imagine, because it's almost like our net zero target. So how does our report add value? Well, the purpose of it is to bring stakeholders together. This is not just the ESO's view. It's really about trying to bring together all of those energy industry stakeholders, government, Ofgem, and beyond, and helps us all join the dots on a lot of the good work that's already being done across industry, across these topics, and help provide a bit of a coherent view that's useful for government, useful for a regulator to see, useful for all of us to see, helps us all understand each other's points of view better, and also to find out where there might be some gaps, some of those points where actually there still needs to be some work to be done if we're going to make this happen. So what have we done to date? The project was kicked off first 4 years ago, and over that period we've looked at topics like EVs, biomass, and latterly in the last couple of years, the role of flexibility. And I'll talk a bit more about that on the next slide. So the last time we ran the project, I said last year there, we kicked it off this time last year, but the project report and Day in the Life report, the first one came out in March. And we looked at the flexibility we as the ESO are going to need to operate the system. So whilst it was sort of electricity focused, we're certainly well aware that the solutions are going to be whole energy system. There were two parts of the project. The first, the Day in the Life project, which we've already mentioned, and this just looked at the Winter's Day at that point. This was so well received, prompted a load of discussion on the webinar, and we ended up with more questions than we could answer. There's more than one question per minute, so I'm expecting quite a lot of questions again today, hopefully. This Day in the Life analysis really helped illustrate how we see the 2035 fully decarbonised system operating, which it does so by pulling on this whole system flexibility. It provided a clear vision of what 2035 could look like and to help us understand if we're going to be on track to meet our 2050 net zero goal. To understand more about how this flexibility is going to be achieved, we published, and that was sort of me and my team as opposed to Regen, a report outlining a flexibility timeline out to 2035. And that's neatly illustrated on the bridge on the slide, bridging the gap, as you already got it already. We work with stakeholders to identify those milestones along the way. So the 2025, 2030, 2035, and they help us all focus our minds about what needs to be done, what's the sequencing of events to get us to those levels of flexibility that we've seen are going to be necessary in the Day in the Life report. The actions that along the way were along those sort of 5 different themes. You can see the different colours there for consumers and markets, digitalisation, roles of responsibility and investment. We had actions in all of those different pots, and they were taken from the many different existing strategies and plans that are already issued in relation to flexibility. And they've been published by ourselves, by other energy industry members, by government, by Ofgem, and we all joined them together in this timeline to show what is due to happen when, how do they all interrelate, and naturally gaps were also identified along the way, and we identified those as well. We had that end vision provided by the Day in the Life, and we then sort of were able to just plan backwards to make sure that we could see what actions need to happen when along the way. If you'd like to know more, please visit the website and you can have a look at the timeline that we produced and at the report. And we're now also operating a tracker, which is just tracking to see if those things that we've committed to ourselves, the ESO, as well as other parts of industry, whether they're being actioned and whether we're on track to begin with to hit those 2025 milestones. The key messages from both parts of the work, I think, were as follows. There's a need for a lot of investment in all sorts of different things. I'm sure you can imagine all the different things. And this needs to be started as soon as possible. There's a sense of urgency, I think, coming from both reports. We know that end consumers are part of the solution and that this will be complex, not just in terms of I&C, but in terms of the 26, 27 million domestic households out there. We know that we need to get them all on board and get them to have the right structure, as well as the right levels of awareness and engagement to be able to help us. And net zero needs cross-sector coordination. It's not something that any one organisation can deliver. It's not something the energy industry can do on its own. It requires a plan and it requires everyone buying into that plan. So now over to Sophie, who's going to outline the findings and conclusions from the Day in the Life work. I really urge you to have a look at the actual report as well. Like Johnny said, it's interactive. It allows you to delve into exactly what you want to. There's loads and loads of information in there, including some great uncertainty questions, which I really like at the end. What if this happens? What if that happens? Please have a look at it. Anyway, over to you, Sophie.
Thanks very much, Becky. And yes, over to Sophie.
Thanks, Becky. And yeah, so to briefly answer a question someone just put in the chat, the motivation behind the 2035 date is the UK government's commitment to a decarbonised electricity system by that year. And so we wanted to ask, what does a difficult day for the system look like in that year? How does it work? And can we use it to tell a story which helps us better understand the challenge ahead? So the initial project was to take a modelled day in 2035, which was going through a period of low renewable energy supply. So a period of Dunkelflaute. If you haven't heard of that word, I've asked Jonty to chuck a little video clip in the chat, which explains it further. But essentially a really difficult day for the renewable energy system because of low output from solar and wind power. The second edition of the document, we've added a day with the opposite problem, too much renewable energy production compared to demand. And basically, it's really important that we're all aware that it's not just about making sure that supply meets demand. There's lots of other challenges to the decarbonised electricity system. And so this second day that we've added to this second edition helps us paint a more well-rounded picture of all the solutions that need to be addressed in order to make sure that the system is reliable and secure. So what we did is we took a 5-year model of supply and demand, and we found the weeks with the greatest difference in renewable energy supply and demand. And that resulted in a day where renewables were in a deficit demand and a day where renewables were in excess. The deficit day, as Johnny already explained earlier, occurred in winter when we had really high demands from space heating coupled with low solar and wind. And the day of renewable excess occurred in the summer when it fell on the weekend. So demands were already lower and also had very low space heating demands coupled with a flurry of activity from renewables. That's why they're called the winter and the summer day, but we're by no means saying that these two scenarios of renewable deficit and excess are going to solely occur in these 2 days. In fact, as Johnny said, it's quite likely that lots of demand from space cooling could result in a renewable deficit in the summer in 2035. So next slide, please. My aim for the next 7 or so minutes is to run through at a high level, give you a teaser, as Johnny said, to the report, give you a little bit of context to hopefully dive into the panel discussion later. But like Johnny said, the report is interactive, and we've done this because there's so many technologies, so many solutions, so many actors that make up the decarbonised electricity system. And it's also quite technical at points. And so we wanted to provide something that was engaging, that allowed people to dive in and out of information where they felt comfortable and where they were interested in. Yes, so the report is broken down into 6 sections, but all give you a different perspective on the decarbonised electricity system. The first and most overarching section is the year, and that kind of gives you the fundamental building blocks that make up the decarbonised electricity system. So what are the generation capacities that we've assumed, what's happening and changing with demand, some other things that are changing like increased digitisation. Zooming in further, we get to the week sections, and these are really great if you want to know more about the weather conditions that have led to the summer and winter day. And finally, our most granular view is the summer and winter days. That steps you through the days in 6-hour increments and asks the really important questions that we should be considering at the various points in the day. For those of you that prefer a print-ready, non-interactive way to absorb your content, there is an executive summary in that format as well, which you can download. Next slide, please. So this is one of the many pop-ups that you'll find throughout the report that we've used to give you more information as and when you want it. This one is on electricity generation, and so it details the underlying assumptions of our generation capacities that have led to the modelling. I should say that the ESO did the underlying modelling, and as part of their Fares and Markets work, and it uses the consumer transformation scenario and the CCC balanced pathway. This chart really gives the overarching question of the report when you have a look at it. On the left-hand side, we've got the breakdown of the generation capacities, and as you can see, it's dominated by renewables. So the question here is, when renewables are too high or are too low for demand, how does the system cope? Next slide, please. So diving into the summer day, right into the middle, the interactivity should be self-explanatory. You can move left to right using the usual page arrows, and we've got a supply demand toggle in the top right-hand corner, which allows you to view it from those different perspectives. The key thing here is the pop-up boxes, which are asking the really key questions at this point in the day. So at this point in the day, for example, we've got a really steep increase of generation from wind and solar. So the question here is, how are these ramp rates managed? Another question that you might be asking is, why is there no low carbon dispatchable online when that was running steadily through the winter day at this point in the day? I've chosen this page because these two questions are part of 2 wider themes that we talk about a lot in the document, and those are system operability and energy flexibility. And I'm just going to briefly highlight those with you quickly. So next slide, please. As I said, managing high ramp rates, that's a question of system operability. And so this is a pop-up from the overarching year section, which details the various aspects of system operability that the ESO has set out as part of their strategy. This is and one reason why I really like the addition of the summer day to this arsenal is that it helps us discuss some of the questions around system operability in more detail. So how is frequency maintained when we've got a system where renewables are the predominant electricity flow on the grid? Next slide, please. The second theme, flexibility. To answer my previous question, why are there no low carbon dispatchable plants running at this point in the summer day? That's because we've assumed that they're running price responsive. And as a result, because the costs are so low during the summer day, then not going to come online. And this is really important because we need low carbon dispatchable not to act as a base load in 2035 so that it doesn't displace lower carbon, lower cost renewables when they are available. And that's one of our key policy implications coming off the back of this, that while low carbon dispatchable generation is absolutely critical, especially on days like the winter day, it's also really important that we support them to develop flexibly. You can also see some of the other flexibility assets that are really critical, like interconnection, like energy storage, like demand side flexibility, some of which will be coming from domestic consumers. And we've acknowledged in this, and I hope that we get into this in the panel discussion, that it's really important that consumer equality issues and other issues are addressed if we want consumers to be enabled to be part of this transition. Next slide, please. So I think I've only got a couple minutes left, but I really want to just highlight this conclusion section to finish off, and also to reiterate that there's a lot in this report. I encourage you to have a dig around and a play yourself, and you're not going to find a silver bullet. There's loads of solutions that need to come together to make this work. And also that, yes, like Becky said, the uncertainties section highlights that this isn't all set in stone. And there's a lot of things that we're going to need to address urgently if we do want to hit this target and if we want to do so at lowest cost. So finally, key takeaways are, given our assumptions and our modelling, there was no need to use any of the backup fossil fuel energy supply. So there is a pathway to a reliable and secure decarbonised energy system. Secondly, it's obviously much more reliant on the weather system, and that's going to make operation more complex, and also means that we need to have lots more focus on a plethora of flexibility assets to help us do this. There's also some other things in the report that help us do this, but not going to get into that now. Have a dig, find them. And finally, while we've identified that there is a pathway, and that's quite optimistic, like Becky said, there's a sense of urgency here. We are going to have to mobilise all of the energy industry as well as energy consumers, and we're going to need to put in substantial coordinated investment to make this work. So that kind of leaves us with the question, how are we going to do this? And hopefully that's going to be picked up by our panel in the upcoming discussion.
Great, thank you very much, Sophie. And as you said, impossible to present the whole thing in a 10-minute slot. So thanks very much for giving us a little a taste of what's in there. And it really is designed to be an interactive report, and one that people will use and hopefully come back to. I should say, when you do look at it, we would welcome comments and feedback and questions, and no doubt they'll come through over the next few days or so, as we found with the first edition. Just before we leave you, Sophie, can I just ask you a question about, there's a lot of assumptions in there, and as you mentioned, a lot of uncertainties, but what was the thing that kind of surprised you the most, or what was kind of unexpected coming through from the analysis that you that you did?
I guess it's that way that everything works together to really make sure that the system is reliable on these really difficult days. So if one of these things that we've put into our assumptions falls through, suddenly we do need to fall back on that fossil fuel generation. And so that's kind of a stark reminder that we do need to get all these cogs moving, and that like I said, there's loads of solutions, and it's really important that we tackle all of them and don't put too much emphasis on a single one.
Great. Well, that's a good question. I think we'll pose to the panel in a couple of minutes. And thanks again, Sophie, for your presentation.
Thanks, Johnny.
So, turning to the panel, I'll just do a quick introductions and then we'll get on with the panel questions. So we've got very pleased that the panel could join us today, and thank you very much for giving up your time. We've got Seljan Kalyahan from Ernst & Young, who's part of their energy team there, and has been advising a range of clients around energy policy. And I know you've been doing a lot of work around flexibility. We've got Maxine Frerk, who comes up in my spell check as Machine Gun, which I think is actually a really good tag for you, Maxine. I think a lot of people will know you on the call. I won't list all the positions you've held, but I know that you've been involved. Obviously, one of the driving forces behind Sustainability First and a part of Grid Ed Policy. You're also on the ENA challenge group and a number of other network-related challenge groups as well. And so, you know, a lot of experience. And of course, going back to your days at Ofgem before that. And then we have Gavin Brown, who's joined us, who has had a position, he was telling me, in the control room or in and around the control room since 2006. So, you know, a long-term operator of the system, currently looking at future system design. And I think you've actually acted as the control room, head of the control room function as well. So the hot seat, if you like, in terms of making this all come together, both now and in the future. So, and I think I might actually start with you, Gavin, because, you know, there's a lot in the report about operability, and operability is one of the key kind of questions that we were trying to address alongside system balancing. So could you just give us a kind of an overview, if you like, of how the ESO is approaching this, how the thinking around operability is developing, and this challenge that you've set yourself to be able to operate a net zero energy system and the progress towards that?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Johnny, and thank you very much for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to contribute to this session. It's a really important topic, kind of challenge of a generation. So it's you know, it's really good to be part of that process. I sort of hesitate to use the word journey, but it's kind of a journey. I don't want to get too X factor, but you know, this is a journey, and it's one that we've started on. We have seen phenomenal change over the last decade, with the growth of both onshore and offshore wind, now upwards of 20 gigawatts and more. Solar generation now peaking, as far as we can see, just below 10 gigawatts, and there's more connected. And you know, a real decrease from large transmission system connected providers to more local providers, and we've seen that in parallel with the decline of traditional power providers, especially coal. So, you know, all of that has really started us along the road to net zero. But to quote my director, what got us here won't get us there. So, you know, there are really challenges in place for us to operate a secure and resilient power system, and we're quite focused on that and working with stakeholders and customers. So at a really high level, we still need to manage the system for similar challenges, but in new ways. So what do I mean by that? So I'm talking about issues around operability. So that's managing the physical characteristics of the system. So that's, can we maintain a stable voltage, a stable frequency, and manage losses on the network? Do we have enough inertia on the network to keep a stable power system, as well as sort of managing the capacity of the system, you know, managing the congestion on the network, and importantly, still have the ability to restore the system should the worst happen. So those services, they've been traditionally provided by large, you know, primarily fossil fuel power stations, but increasingly we're having to find new ways of providing those services. So a few examples of the now, we're working very closely with distributed energy resources and distribution system operators to put in place new markets and methods of managing congestion on the transmission network. We've introduced and we've got a roadmap for new market response and reserve services, and we plan to roll out more to meet the challenges of managing frequency on a very low inertia system. And we've got a number of Pathfinder projects out there which are finding new ways of finding providers. And also our distributed restart project is which is looking at ways of restoring the network from the distribution network. is starting to be incorporated into the way of procuring restoration services. So there's lots of activity going on there. But in addition to that, flexibility, that's really important. And we're starting to see more active demand participation, which is really good news.
We'll come to flexibility in a minute, but I mean, if I was to paraphrase the conclusions from the day in the life, there's lots of issues around operability, but in nearly every area we looked at, there are solutions in progress, there are new markets being developed, there's obviously a huge amount of activity in that area. Would we be complacent to say that the operability challenges are largely met or will be met? Or let me put that another way, what kind of worries you at the moment around operability? What are the scenarios that we really ought to be still worried about or still thinking about?
No, there's absolutely more to do. Well, we need to, we're not quite there yet in terms of a number of the services that we need, especially around probably inertia, are still provided by traditional spinning generation rather than asynchronous providers like wind and interconnection. So, that's still challenged to be met. I think we can do it, but there's that flexibility. I think that's a big operability consideration, is that the importance of being able to flex. We saw that during COVID. COVID was a real insight into what the system might look in the future, because suddenly we had a almost 20+% reduction in demand in the summer months. And that was a real insight into the importance of flexibility and long-term storage and interconnection.
Great. Seljan, coming to you, Gavin's talked about flexibility, and that's clearly an area that you're particularly interested in. And Gavin's also said, at the moment, it happens that we are still very reliant on fossil fuel generation. CCGT plants still make up the bulk of balancing mechanism actions, for example, at the moment. So our assumption is that that's going to be completely replaced by a whole new flexibility products and services, in particular from storage providers, but also interconnectors, demand side response, etc. It's a big assumption, and the numbers in there in terms of how many gigawatts of flexibility we need are quite huge. What's your perspective at the moment about where that flexibility market is and how quickly those are going to come on stream?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Johnny, and thanks for inviting me to this panel. So the kind of latest study on Bridging the Gap set out like a really great picture on all the different types of flexibility, how they can be used come 2035. It's great to see that articulation across the summer and winter day. But there absolutely are investment challenges there that need to be addressed to make that a realization. So some long-lived, some kind of newer. I mean, one of those is still the ongoing challenge of finding locations for new assets. We're all well versed in this challenge, finding land where you're going to get through the planning process, and that's kind of near enough to network capacity to kind of limit costs. It's not easy. While we've got network heat maps, changes to distribution charges, we've got the centralized strategic network plan coming, all helpful and welcome. We still need coordination with the planning process to make that easier. Another challenge that we're seeing specifically from, it's a concern really from some investors in flexibility assets, is around long-term certainty over revenues. So, great that some of our ancillary service markets now have kind of clear market rules, transparent outcomes, use of availability payments. There's still that idea, and I think, Gavin, you were alluding to this, that as the sector evolves, the ESO and DSOs are going to change, and they're going to change what they're procuring, like the technical specifications they're looking for. And so investors are concerned that if they invest in an asset type with like specific capabilities, that's going to fall out of fashion, let's say, over time, and revenues will decline. So that's a concern for them. There are quite a few other kind of challenges, I guess, but I suppose the last one I want to touch on is lack of regulatory and policy certainty. Perhaps something I wouldn't have necessarily mentioned or highlighted a couple of years ago, but Recent announcements and consultations kind of have brought this to the forefront. So we've had REMA, we've got changes to planning permissions for solar, we've got revenue limits on some nuclear and renewables plants coming in, we've got changes in system governance, which means for investors, they can no longer assume that in this country, there won't be significant kind of policy and regulation changes, during the lifetime of their investments. And so we're seeing that feeding into business plans, and it's kind of what we don't quite know yet is how that's still going to feed into business plans, even when financial markets might have settled. So, that is a kind of a newer issue that's cropped up. So I definitely echo Becky and Sophie's comments around the kind of need to act on all of these challenges and act now, because you need to get your investment environment right now to be able to have everything you need for 2035. You can't wait for 2035 to get the investment right. That's way too late.
Great. I think we'll come back to that point you've made about the policy environment and the economic environment towards the end. I'd like to come back to that, but just sort of going back to your point about flexibility and how we get that investment going. And I mean, you raised a couple of points there around this kind of devil's embrace at the moment, that the network needs flexibility, but the flexibility providers also need network capacity in order to deploy, and that needs to be unlocked. And then your other point, which is absolutely spot on, is about creating a market. And we saw that with firm frequency response a few years ago when that new product was introduced. And that was probably the trigger for about 1 gigawatt of battery storage to actually get built, because they could see that way. So in the absence of subsidies, and flexibility has largely existed without subsidies, do we need more proactive market creation, revenue creation from the, I mean, we had a lot of activity around power responsive and looking at how you could stack different revenue models. Does that need to be reinvigorated?
Yes, I think reinvigorated, but a lot of that is around communications and education and explaining. So, among the investment community, we have those that are already operating in the electricity sector, already either very knowledgeable or, getting there and finding their way. But looking at the kind of the amount of capacity of flexibility and lots of, different types of assets that, you've presented in the Bridging the Gap study, we need a lot more. We are likely to see new entrants in the sector, and it is quite challenging for the people to get their heads around it. I mean, then they've got to answer whether they have the risk appetite for this type of sector. But I think Power Responsive was very good. It was a great kind of flagship piece to get people's awareness, to raise awareness and to get people linked up and talking and communicating. And I think that really helps. So something like that, again, I don't think it necessarily is like we need a plethora of markets, we need hundreds and hundreds. That's just too much complexity. It's more around the awareness and communication and education.
To get it going. And I'll put you on the spot just briefly. We've got gigawatts and gigawatts in the development pipeline. I mean, if you look at the number of projects coming through planning or the number of projects with connection agreement, I mean, huge numbers, but it does seem to be a kind of stalled at the moment. If that was released and we went for growth, to use the kind of topical word at the moment, I mean, how quickly do you think those projects would come on stream, and where might we be in, say, 2025 or 2028 in the sort of medium term in terms of the capacities we might see coming forward?
So if that were to happen, I think we would see a lot come through, and perhaps enough that the kind of say, for example, if we think that a lot of these coming through now are still 1 to 2 hour batteries, this perhaps more in Gavin's field, but we probably will see enough of that type of capacity. But the ESO and DSOs will be needing other types of flexibility to come through.
Longer duration,
and so some of those haven't even started their journey in development and planning yet. So that is where the focus will need to be.
Great, thank you very much, Seljan. So Maxine, we talked about flexibility, and in our day in the life, one big source of flexibility is the consumer. And we've made a whole bunch of assumptions about the consumer in the future, their behavior, and they are becoming active system participants. Do you think are we taking it for granted that that's going to happen? And are we kind of taking a rather systems view of the world without really considering, the consumer's behavior and what their objectives might be?
So I think you're absolutely right to have that as a big part of the solution. And I think it's worth firstly unpicking, you've got the I&C customers who for a long while have been providing flexibility, and so I can refer to the power responsive scheme, which really got that group understanding what was the opportunities and what was involved. But I actually almost feel that's kind of been lost a little bit recently, because everybody's got terribly excited about the potential for EVs and smart charging, which has to be part of the solution, because in some sense it's part of the, if we all had EVs and just charged them when we got home, that would make the problem a lot worse.
Is that a new toy syndrome? Maybe?
It's a new toy syndrome, I think. And I think the other reason, Sophie alluded to it at the beginning, is making sure that there are opportunities for everybody. So I think for EV chargers, it feels relatively natural. Particularly in the early days, people who are getting involved in that are going to be quite happy with the idea of having a smart charger and the simple idea that you make sure your car's ready to be used in the morning and it'll charge when it's most cost effective to do so. And that's not very active consumer engagement. That's just customers, once they've got an EV, being willing to play that game. The much harder part of all of this is going to be when we think about heat. And that's not about getting customers engaged in flexibility, that's getting customers engaged in decarbonisation of heat. But as part of that, I was really pleased to see in the report the kind of references to thermal storage, which doesn't tend to get the limelight that's required. But that again is the key to customers being able to provide flexibility around their heat as it's electrified, is actually having that capacity for that thermal storage capacity, whether it's in the mass of the building or in hot water tanks or phase change materials. And there's, there are new products coming through in that space, but they're not quite as sexy as the EV market. So I think there's a mix, and there's clearly a need for more focus on that area, more thought about how to make sure everybody can be involved. But it obviously has to be a big part of the story.
In looking at the modelling, because we were looking at a week rather than just a single day, it became clear that you need to use demand side flexibility quite carefully, because if you're not careful, you could use it as a point to sort of reduce demand at a particular moment in the system, so a peak time period on a single day. But the danger over the course of a week is that you actually shift the demand to another point in the cycle, and you actually might make it worse. You might actually create a tidal wave where if you tell everybody to stop charging their EVs or turn down their heat, then that comes back as a form of demand deficit that you then have to meet at another point. So it's clear that we need to be very smart in how we use demand, and we need to be very careful about how we manage that on the network, not just at the high voltage network, but thinking about the low voltage network as well. Is that something that you think the networks are able to do, or is it the market that's going to drive that, or where does that kind of subtlety come from about how we use demand?
So I do think it has to come from those that have the interface with the customer and think about those things. I mean, we've already seen a lot coming out from, dare I say, Octopus. I mean, they were the driving force with their big dirty turn down that really prompted the ESO to set up its demand flexibility service for this winter, and hopefully we'll learn something from that. Every cloud has a silver lining. If we have some tough times this winter, we'll at least get some learning for 2035. And they've also been looking at demand turn up as well, to solve your summer day up in Scotland with Spen. So I think they have to be the ones to think about how to make that into a proposition that works for customers. That's not the network's job, but the networks have a role, I think, really in thinking about how you specify those services in a way that the suppliers can make use of. We have a lot of talk about level playing fields, but if a minimum size is 1 megawatt, you've automatically ruled out parts of the market. Can you aggregate it? What level of reliability is required? What are the conditions around how long it has to last for? So there has to be, and whether we're back to all the different sorts of sources of flexibility, they all have different features. So I think for the networks, it's making sure that they are specifying their services in a way that can make use of the whole range of those services, including the customer demand side, but not only that. rather than trying to define one service and saying it's a level playing field because everybody can bid for it. That's not
Yes,
level.
and as Seljan says, trying to define it in a way that, you know, you don't then exclude technology types and then increase the risk for investors who are thinking, well, you know, this is all one trick pony territory. If I bid into one thing, then I'm kind of excluding myself from other things. Can I ask a couple of quick fire questions here? Because just looking at the questions that are coming through on the blog and also from the last time, interconnectors, where do we stand on interconnectors? We have got a lot of interconnection in the day in the life, not just to provide energy for us in terms of imports, but actually critical in terms of our exports. And it's notable actually that Liz Truss has said we want to be a net energy exporter by 2040. And given that we're going to electrify and given that we need to export electricity, that means a lot more interconnectors. So Gavin, you know, obviously you're thinking about this winter and the use of interconnectors this winter, but in 2035, should we be worried about that, or is this just part of us being part of a bigger integrated energy system that provides more diversity of supply? You know, where do we sit on that?
I think I would agree with your short summary there. The interconnections are absolutely part of the solution. I don't think, you know, despite the picture emerging this winter, you know, I think interconnectors play a really vital part in enabling, you know, the nations across Europe to share reserve. You know, so
and Seljan, is that an area of investment?
Decarbonising in the same way as us, and it absolutely enables us to share those reserves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Obviously, there's probably less parties that would want to actually, you know, undertake the role of interconnector owner operator, but yeah, investors are interested in interconnectors. They perhaps are always seem to be less familiar with kind of the revenue mechanism there. But we have seen a number of parties interested in interconnectors, you know, around the world. So it should not be any different for GB.
Great. And the other area, which is kind of a gap, I have to say, is this and Sophie talked about it a few times, is dispatchable low carbon generation and just what we mean by that. So this is really what's going to replace our fossil fuels and our peaking plants. And the options are all, I would say, problematic. We have, on the one hand, biomass and bioenergy and the potential to have negative emissions from that, but a whole bunch of issues around sustainability and source of supply. Carbon capture and storage, again, something that we've been waiting for and been looking for in terms of a new technology that's going to scale up. And then the other one, which is maybe topical at the moment, is use of hydrogen and hydrogen generation to create a kind of a circle, if you like, between hydrogen manufacture from electricity, storage, and then using that to provide our peaking plant. I think I'll come to Maxine first. Dispatchable generation, I mean, there's a lot riding on that, but I'm not sure that we've got the business models in place or the policy support in place to really drive that forward. Do you think that that's correct, or do you think that we you know, how are we going to bring that market to a fruition?
So I absolutely agree with you that it's crucial and needs to be thought about in terms of the market design. I mean, I would pull out in particular hydrogen, because, you know, that also goes
pull out in a good way or a bad way?
In a good way, because
good way. Okay,
you know, I think, you know, again, perhaps this is down to the ESO starting to really think about cross-vector system design. So, you know, you have your summer day, and one of the things that you had as a solution for your summer day is, well, we'll take some of that wind off. And, you know, if you've got something that can really be truly that kind of interseasonal storage, as well as providing, so it's not necessarily that you want it for baseload, but you want it as dispatchable. It's then providing that flexibility, and it's in a way to both hoover up the excess renewable generation and then also to feed it in when it might be needed at other points in the year in a relatively easy way to store it. So, you know, everybody always says that's the beauty of gas at the minute, but, you know, so how do we make sure that we get some of that benefit back in the system?
I think that's absolutely right. And you know, just we were stretching hydrogen as much as we could in the day in the life, because we could see exactly, as you said, that virtuous circle between using excess renewables and at the same time providing that long-term storage. 2035 though is almost a little bit early.
Mhm.
Because I mean, even our plans in the UK, you know, was it 5 gigawatts by 2030 of hydrogen production, and then, you know, how much generation will we get? It felt more like a 2040 solution, if I'm being honest. And so I think that's one of the areas where we, you know, we're sort of pushing up the boundary of what could be developed by 2035.
I would look at what's happening internationally on that front. I mean, when I came back from COP a year ago, it was the top of my learning list was the extent to which every other country is talking about
is really pushing it. Yeah,
pushing it
Germany.
in that kind of way. So, you know, it's not just what we do, but if we want the growth agenda and the export opportunities, then we need to be working out how to make sure we're ahead of that curve as well.
Yeah. Seljan, on that hydrogen question,
Yep.
Are you seeing a lot of activity around hydrogen for electricity generation? I know there's a huge amount of activity around hydrogen production and hydrogen for transport and industrial processes, but specifically around energy generation.
Yeah, no, there is, and it is an area now of kind of focus for policy development. And so, you know, that's great to see. And then kind of alongside the business models that have already kind of come around for kind of DPAs for gas CCUS. So there is work going on there, but, you know, those business models, well, some of them being consulted on, others need to be consulted on. They need to be then fleshed out in full detail, finalized, to then be put out into the market and tested. So there's great works going on about them. There's kind of consultation with industry inputs, etc. But until they're tested, we don't know how kind of fast they're going to deliver, like how, you know, who's going to actually put the money down behind those business models, even if they kind of nod positively in consultations.
Great. So I've got a broader question, and I'm sort of hesitant to ask this at this stage in the panel discussion because we could probably talk for a long time, but two kind of related questions actually. Energy crisis, including the cost of energy crisis, is that going to inhibit, slow down investment to get to net zero, or is that kind of the trigger that we've been kind of needing to really get us moving forward? That's the first question. And then the second question is, in terms of the current economic climate, where we are at the moment with interest rates, inflation, the pound, borrowing costs, again, you know, is that going to inhibit investment in net zero and renewables in particular, or does the growth agenda kind of kick in and everybody starts to look at, you know, low carbon growth is kind of the only game in town at the moment? So I might come to Gavin first of all. The first part of that was the kind of the energy crisis and the cost of energy. Is that going to inhibit our investment in renewables and net zero, or is it the kind of trigger that we need?
Well, I do hope it's the trigger we need, Johnny. I think there's, you know, net zero is not, you know, anti-growth. There's a huge amount of economic growth to be and jobs and economic stimulus to come out of net zero. I think the other benefit really is that the consumers are now very aware of their role to play in this, and, you know, promoting that demand flexibility. So I think net zero, you know, out of this, hopefully we will drive towards net zero, but, you know, clearly there are different views across government and industry on this.
Even Rees-Mogg is a recent convert, apparently, according to The Guardian this morning. He's now kind of fully on board with the green growth, the green growth agenda. And so, Seljan, that cost of capital question, I mean, is that going to be the kind of a real problem, or is that, you know, are there people out there that are still looking for long-term investments, irrespective of what the market's doing in the short term?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think just the kind of turmoil we're seeing in the financial markets right now, the impact it's having on investors is if they don't need to make a move right now, you know, they're just biding their time, but they're still in this game for the long run. So yes, we might see a bit of a hopefully short-term dip in investment right now, but I don't think that's going to harm the long-term kind of perspective on investment. When it comes to cost of capital, I think this is kind of a much broader topic in terms of, like, you know, least cost, fair cost. You know, is the regulator and government going to be happy enough to provide investors with, you know, a return that attracts them enough from, you know, investing their money in other countries or just in other types of assets, given that it's because the change is not only here in GB in terms of financial markets, it is global. So there is kind of higher returns to be had elsewhere.
I mean, our experience on this is that it can be quite binary. It's not like you have to pay an extra 0.5%. It's just projects either happen or they don't happen.
Can't have half a project.
It's not like you can say, oh, well, we'll just dial it up a little bit. I mean, it's interesting. I don't want to be flippant, but I mean, if government bonds aren't quite as secure as we thought they were going to be, maybe people will be looking at offshore wind farms as a long-term, you know, 20, 30-year investment instead, maybe.
Maybe, as long as that comes through in the price there, then yeah.
Right, and that price certainty is that really going to be about contracts for difference or some other mechanism to provide that rather than relying on the market? I mean, that seems to be the sentiment at the moment. Yeah,
I mean, that is definitely the movement. Obviously, confidence in the stability, like that you have a 10-15-year contract and it's going to stay exactly as it is like slightly off right now just because of that revenue limit that's coming in, but on the kind of potentially on old RO plants, but you know, that is kind of bankable, let's say, with investors. So yeah.
Right. Maxine, I'm going to let you have the honour of closing the panel discussion. We talked about cost of living, and obviously sustainability first. You're doing a lot of work there looking at, you know, the consumer and just transition, etc. You know, where do you think the average consumer is at the moment in terms of their relationship with energy, if you like, or, you know, their I mean, that sounds a little bit pretentious, but you know what I mean, like, you know, how they think about energy.
So I think probably how they think about energy at the minute is essentially about the cost of it and doesn't go much further than that. I mean, that does mean, and I've always felt, even those that don't have the smart technology, if they could save money by being flexible in when they use their energy, there's a lot more people these days who would do so if the appropriate protections were there. And I actually think, you know, missed opportunities really just, you know, people are worried about gas and they're worried about Putin. And actually, I think, again, you know, we're not talking to people actually about how they could reduce their reliance on gas by using energy at different times.
And now's the time to offer.
I think
there
is a wider conversation that people would be open to, but absent that narrative coming out of anywhere central, I think all they're thinking about is the bills. Yeah.
In one of our heat pages, we made a comment that there's 130,000 gas engineers that are effectively out there being advocates and salespeople for, you know, gas heating. And let's be honest, I mean, gas over the last 30 years has been tremendous in terms of the, you know, equality of access to energy and heat, and we need to find a replacement for that. But we don't have the equivalent, really, you know, selling and also communicating low carbon solutions, including, of course, let's not forget energy efficiency, which is the most obvious low hanging fruit.
And that's why I drew out that distinction between EVs, where, you know, there is you know, they are an inherently attractive product. People will go to the car sales room to find out, you know, what's on offer or buy what car magazine. But, you know, where do you go to find out about heat? You know, and I've even heard stories of people being recommended a heat pump by their architect, and then their plumber saying, no, you don't want one of those. You know, so at the minute, that kind of source of information about what the future of heat is from the on the ground professionals, we need to do something. So maybe 14 million spent on energy efficiency campaigning might be quite a good piece of expenditure for government, perhaps, if they thought about it for a nanosecond. Yeah. It's saving them money, I think, at the end of the day. Yeah, as well. Especially, yeah. Now they're taking it. Coming out of all our pockets one way or another. Listen, we're just about out of time, so thank you very much, panel. That was a really interesting conversation, and thanks for your time. And I think I'm just going to wrap up now with again, everybody that's attended this afternoon. Thank you very much. There's a huge number of comments coming through on the chat line. I see that Jonty has been trying to address a lot of those. We'll take those away and think about maybe trying to address those in another way. I'm coming back to some of the questions that have been raised. And thanks again to the ESO for commissioning this piece of work and for providing, I mean, not just the funding for it to happen, but really the knowledge and insight and a lot of their time
to make sure that it is a good kind of robust piece of analysis. And as we've said several times, it is an interactive report. It's designed to be used and played with, and go in there and, you know, please come back and send us any comments or any questions that you've got. We'd be more than happy to address those and, you know, add that into the kind of overall knowledge capital that we have in this area. So thank you very much. And I think we're just on time now, so we'll close the launch event. Bye-bye now.